Yes.
I'm so honored to be a recipient of this award. I've been an admirer of Margaret's work for a long time. I met her a number of times over the years, and I always wished I could have asked her one question. She got her PhD late in life, in her 50s. She was a teacher, a mother for many years, and I had a similar experience. I didn't get my PhD until I was in my 40s, partly because I struggled in math when I was young. I almost failed calculus at university the first time here at U of T. I was saved by the bell curve, brought me up to a pass, and then I dropped math and didn't get back into it until I was about 33. I came back to U of T and started to do undergraduate work in math. So I would have loved to have asked Margaret if her passion for teaching and for exposing people to the beauty of mathematics came from the fact that she had to wait a long time before she could really engage fully in the subject. And that's how I feel that I missed a lot. I missed a lot of opportunities because I didn't discover that I could do math until late in life. And so that's partly why I founded Jump Math as a charity, because I didn't want kids to waste their potential or spend years doubting themselves. And I'm accepting this award really on behalf of Jump Math, because this is a collective effort, huge team over many years. Some of them are here today. And not only the Jump Math team, but researchers like Tracy Solomon, who's here today, Dragonette. I mean, there's a huge team of researchers who've helped us get better and improve the program, and also administrators, principals, teachers. So it really is a huge collective effort. Jump is a charity, and it started as a tutoring club about 20 years ago. I was just trying to help some local kids, because when I was finishing my doctorate, I thought I'd been very lucky to have gotten into mathematics, and I wanted to help some local kids. And the very first students in Jump, I asked the principal to send some kids who were struggling, and she sent a lot of kids from her special ed classes. And I wasn't really prepared for that. The very first girl who arrived in grade 6, I found out quickly she couldn't count by twos even. I found out she was testing at a grade 1 level. They thought her IQ was 70. She was assessed as MID. And I was terrified. I just didn't know what to do with her. So I started building this math program for her and other students. And I'll talk about her a bit later. And we started placing tutors in the Toronto schools. And one day some teachers asked us to come in and help in the classroom. And that was a real turning point for us and a revelation. I'm a playwright also. And when I started working in classrooms, I saw the kids as an audience. And as a playwright, knew that people will never get more excited than when they feel something as a group. Durkheim, the sociologist, called it collective effervescence, when you feel a sense of awe or purpose together. And I saw that with the kids, that it was far more exciting to tutor them in groups than one-on-one. And we also realized that if we worked with teachers, we'd have a much bigger impact, because a teacher can reach a kid all day, 5 days a week. So we became gradually, we developed the publications department with a team of writers, layout people, editors. We developed outreach for professional learning for teachers. And we now reach, I think, about 200,000 kids in Canada, and we're starting to grow in other countries. Well, 200,000 kids in Canada use Jump as their main classroom program now. It's been a struggle. It's been many years of struggle, but we've had some breakthroughs recently. The Alberta government licensed Jump for its elementary schools, our resources, which was quite thrilling for us. And we've started a large pilot in the Toronto District School Board also. I've been in schools all week working with the teachers. But because we've been in the trenches, I mean, I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours doing demo lessons, working in classrooms. Diana Fitzgerald, who's here, I worked in your classroom. Yeah. As a volunteer for many, many years. And a lot of the techniques of Jump came through that work. But we've now partnered with many cognitive scientists, including Tracy Solomon, who's here today, to do research and also to help a line jump with the research in cognitive science. So I was invited to speak at the Aspen Brain Forum by Adele Diamond, who's done a lot of work in executive function, and published an article in Scientific American Mind, because a lot of cognitive scientists think that what we stumbled on in the trenches working with kids is well supported by evidence. So I wanted to start with a story. There's a book I came across a while ago, an amazing book called How Not to Be Wrong, The Power of Mathematical Thinking. And I'm a little nervous today because even though I'm a mathematician, there's some math in this. And I'm not a statistician, so I hope I don't get it wrong. Like even at my age, you know, I have these anxieties that come from my childhood. But this is an incredible story. There's a famous statistician, Abraham Wald, who was working with a group of statisticians in Chicago during the war. And according to Ellenberg, they had a huge impact on the war effort. And at one point, some officers brought them some data about the planes that were being hit by bullets. And it shows the number of bullet holes per square foot on different parts of the planes that were coming back. So, you know, if you were an officer and trying to figure out where you'd put more armor, you can only put so much armor on a plane because it slows it down, it makes it less maneuverable, it burns too much fuel. So they had to make choices. Where would you put the armor? You know, it seems kind of obvious. Like if you had between the fuselage and the engine, a lot more bullet holes there. So you'd think you'd want to armor the fuselage. But Wald said, no, actually, it's where there's fewer bullets. That's where you want to put the armor. And you know, that might be kind of surprising. So on the engine is where you want to put the armor. But this is where I'm afraid I might get the math wrong. According to Ellenberg, statisticians often set one probability to 0 if they're trying to understand how a problem works. And so imagine if a bullet hit the engine and there was 0 probability of that plane coming back. Every time it hit the engine, it's going to go down. How many would come back with bullet holes in the engine? 0 planes would come back with bullet holes in the engine because they'd all be shot down. Or another way to look at it is imagine you're shooting paintballs at the plane and you get a random distribution. Then you'd want to go with these numbers, but you're not, as Ellenberg points out, you're missing part of the sample. It's the planes that went down. The missing bullet holes are equally important. So, you know, and that's a mistake we make often. He points out with mutual funds, for instance, you know, you could look at the performance of a fund or a stock fund over years and look at how those stocks performed over 10 years. But if you're missing the stocks that went under, you can't really judge the performance of that portfolio. I think he called it survivorship bias. Someone's nodding, so I hope that's right. Okay, good. You know, we look at the survivors, but not the ones that went down. So the reason I told this story is for 2 reasons. It really illustrates the power of math. I mean, this made a tremendous difference to war effort. You know about Turing's work, where he cracked a code that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And there's more and more evidence now that math is an incredibly important subject, and that we're really held back as a society because we have so many people who are afraid of math, as I was, or enumerate. And you can see that in the news, the way people respond to the news. But it also is a great metaphor because when we're thinking of math education and we're thinking about what programs or what methods would work best for kids, we tend to look at the kids who flourish, what's good for them, you know, deep problem solving right from day one. Those kids will flourish, they survive, they do well, but we don't look at the ones that didn't survive, that fell through the cracks. And I've seen a lot of those kids. So I think in trying to develop equitable programs, we really need to do more careful research around all children and how whether they flourish or not in the kind of programs we design. Just to give you an example of the surprising importance of mathematics, Tracy Solomon sent me this slide it's a big longitudinal study that was done with, I think, preschool kids, like around kindergarten age. Kindergarten, is that right? Yeah. Yeah. And, okay. Yeah. Start of elementary school. And those numbers show the sort of correlation between their achievement in early math, early reading, and so on, and then later at the end of elementary school in math and reading achievement and so on. I hope that's clear. Here, I think I have a pointer here. So here you see early math, early reading, and here's at the end of school. And you'll notice that math really strongly predicts math and reading achievement. Math achievement, it strongly predicts math achievement. It also strongly predicts math and reading achievement and reading achievement. In fact, math predicts achievement in reading more strongly than reading does, which is quite surprising. Oh, sorry. And that's one of a number of longitudinal studies that are referenced there now, which is quite surprising to people. I mean, it's very important. I'm a playwright. It's very important to invest in literacy, but we're missing something in not investing more heavily in numeracy. And math predicts all kinds of things for students, you know, dropout rates, whether you're going to stay in school, the kind of job you'll get, your financial security, and so on. And so why is this so important? This is a case study we did years ago in a school in Toronto where the teacher tested the kids coming into grade 5 on a standardized test called the TOMA, and that's the range of marks. So I was just in the school yesterday and I asked, that would represent about a 3 grade level difference between the bottom kids and the top kids. And as in every school I visited, the teachers said, yeah, we're seeing those differences. They're even worse now with learning loss. So that's a 3 grade level difference. And this is a private school where parents are paying money to produce that difference. What does that say about our society if people will pay money and could put their kid anywhere to produce that difference where we've got very weak students and strong students? I think it says we believe that's natural and there's nothing we can do about it. Maybe we can raise the mean a little bit, but there's nothing we can do about those gaps. Because math is just an inherently strong, hard subject, and it's a subject that kind of weeds kids out. So the teacher, who's an unbelievable teacher, followed JUMP with real fidelity for a year. And a year later, when she retested the kids, that's what the bell curve looked like. So that was reported in the New York Times. It's real data. We just hired a teacher who won the Prime Minister's Award who got exactly those same results on the EQAO. She had a very weak class coming to grade 6. A year later, 80% of her kids hit level 4, and the rest passed. In a year where only 50% of kids in Ontario passed the exam. So we've seen it across the board in all kinds of different situations. Also, a year later, this teacher had her kids 2 years. At the end of grade 6, all her kids signed up for the Pythagoras math competition, and all but 3 got awards of distinction. The other 3 came close. So that's the kind of potential that's in children, even at that late in grade 5. And I call this intellectual poverty because it means we're only tapping the tiniest fraction of kids' potential. And intellectual poverty cuts across all social classes because this was in a private school. It's an invisible problem. That's why I love this example of the missing bullet holes. It's an invisible problem. We can't even see it because we don't have the right frame. We think we have a random sample, but it's actually only part of the sample. This is another invisible problem that we can't see. Nobody believes that every child could learn mathematics, or virtually every child could learn mathematics at this kind of level. And so we have to ask, what's that doing to our society? It's not just math, it's every subject, but I happen to be talking about math. We saw some hint of this also in a bigger study that Tracy Solomon conducted, a randomized controlled trial. So this was in the second year, you notice on the right, the black box is JUMP and the white box is a textbook program. This is in the group using JUMP with high fidelity, and the researchers said this is quite a large effect size, quite a large difference between the groups, and this was on EQAO style problems. So JUMP students made significantly more progress in problem solving. And this was a study where we didn't have our professional learning fully developed, our resources were weaker, we didn't have as many supports, and we underestimated the amount of training teachers would need for JUMP. So we think we could probably do better now, and we're trying to set up some new studies. But I mentioned the first girl arrived in JUMP. This is something that's even more radical in some ways. So you remember she couldn't count by twos in grade 6, and they thought her IQ was 70. So I worked with her for 3 years. I developed the early lessons of jump for her. So that's fewer lessons than you get in a year of school. And she decided in grade 9 that she was going to go into academic grade 9 math. So that's a 9-year catch-up. And I was terrified that she wouldn't make it, but she not only made it, she skipped a year and finished academic grade 10 math. And this is an example of it. This is another big study in England we did with behavioral and learning disabled kids, where every year we got these kind of increases in the number of kids passing the national exams in grade 6. The interesting thing here, these were very poor schools with very violent schools, worse than anything I've seen in Toronto. And the teachers wrote things like, the behavioral students are now reprimanding the other students because they want to get on with their lesson. They're so excited about being good at math. So it had a big impact on behavior too. So this is a test the girl wrote in grade 9. Remember, this girl couldn't count by twos. She told me she'd never read a chapter book in her life. This is the kind of thing she was doing by grade 9, 3 years later. She was doing algebra with decimals. She was doing word problems. And she wasn't just memorizing a problem type, because she was doing completely different type of ratio problems. So if you ever, I just couldn't believe what she could do by that point. And there's new research suggesting maybe this isn't so surprising. I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, Tracy. You can jump in, but French neurologists did brain scans of mathematicians like myself and found that when we solve problems, we use a very primitive part of the brain that has the same sense of space and number that kindergarten kids do. And I could have told you that, because I never feel I understand anything unless I can reduce it to that level. Like calculus, anything, I don't understand it unless, and logicians proved 100 years ago that all math can be reduced to absolutely trivial concepts. But this is a secret that's been kept by the population, from the general population. I think that what if math was actually the easiest subject? And what if it was a great equalizer? Because I could never close the gap this quickly in any other subject. And what if the things that kids learn, like the ability to stay on task, to control their behavior, to see patterns, to make inferences, spill over into every other subject? So Mary Jane, that teacher, got better results in reading without changing her reading program. It started to affect all of the subjects. So you might think, well, why aren't we seeing these results, or what's holding us back? Part of it is that there's a new kind of science of learning that's finally beginning to have an effect in the education system. And there's trends now where people are realizing kids are suffering from too much extraneous information in problem solving that's just destroying their confidence and actually is not efficient. I'm going to talk about that later. Mindsets are incredibly important. That you need to scaffold challenges into chunks. I'm a mathematician. I can still only handle one thing at a time. I need scaffolding myself. Basic knowledge is more important than people thought. People used to think you could do contentless problem solving, like just teach some strategies. But now there's all this research showing if you don't have domain-specific knowledge, you can't be a great problem solver. One great example is they did a study of physics students at university and asked them to classify physics problems. The first year students looked at very superficial features. They'd say, these are all about inclined planes or springs. The older students saw the deep structure. They'd say, these are all about conservation of momentum, even though the problems look completely different. So if you don't have domain-specific knowledge, you can't even begin to see the structure of the problems. So times tables, for instance, you can't make predictions or estimates or see patterns if you don't know those kind of basic facts. And that doesn't mean you have to drill them in a rote way. Beautiful patterns and the kids can discover themselves that help them actually remember the tables. And it's also important to move from concrete materials to more abstract models quickly. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So we call the method of jump structured inquiry. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. One of the things that's really different is, which you saw in Mary Jane's result, that bell curve. Kids need different instruction, and I'll show you how we do that in JUMP, especially in the beginning. But we believe that doesn't mean you have to have differentiated outcomes necessarily. And over the years, the team at JUMP has developed an incredible program that the most important part of the teacher's resources, and you can get those online on our website. They're very detailed lesson plans for the full curriculum across Canada from K to 8. The teachers in this study in Toronto are just going nuts about the lesson slides. They love the slides because they make it so easy for them. You know, you can project all the key questions, the diagrams, kids can come up and draw on them, or if you have smart boards, you can manipulate them and clone shapes and so on. It allows for a really dynamic lesson. And we beg people not to use we call them assessment practice books, until the lesson's over. Some people think we're a workbook program because we're a small charity and haven't really gotten the word out about all these resources, just starting to now. But it's a fun, dynamic lesson where the teacher leads by questions. The kids are always solving puzzles and problems. This is an example on the left, on the right. No, left you see some text from the teacher's guide, and on the right you see what the student would see. So I want to look at problem solving. This is a great cartoon from Peanuts. And we asked teachers, like, what are some of the barriers to problem solving if you're trying to equalize the classroom? And one thing they often say is language. And Tracy sent me this study with preschool kids where they found that on addition problems, kids in poor neighborhoods and wealthier neighborhoods didn't show much difference, any significant difference when it came to solving problems. Like if you put 3 counters in front of the child, cover them up, put 4 more and say how many, there's no difference between the kids in different communities. But as soon as you start to add language, you see these significant differences if it's a story problem or presented with language. Same thing in subtraction. So already those inequities are starting to happen. So in grade 3 and 4, kids start to grapple, or even 2, with part-whole problems. You might have 10 marbles and 5 green, how many are blue? And quite often, the only experience they have is reading problems over and over. Teachers might say, underline the key words, so they might underline more. What do you think more would suggest to a child if they're reading a problem? What operation would more suggest? Yeah, addition. But depending on the problem, who has more, it could mean subtraction if you're trying to figure out the person who has less. So sometimes just reading more word problems is inequitable, it's not efficient, and it kind of creates anxieties among kids. It starts to differentiate the classroom. So here's another approach that people can try that's somewhat different. This is a student book, so it's not the lesson. The kids in the lesson would have little black line masters with those grids on them. And the teacher would pose a problem, starting with easier problems, like you have 5 green and 3 blue marbles. They would shade boxes, as you see there, and they would find the difference in the total. So I hope that's clear. But notice there's not a lot of language. Every child can succeed if they can read green and blue equally. And we also don't assume they have great fluency. We build fluency and jump through games, activities, and patterns, mental math exercises, but we don't assume they have fluency coming in. And you want to equalize the playing field as much as possible. So all kids can draw on this grid and they can all participate equally. And then the teacher goes through all the different types of part-whole problems. You might have the part and the difference, or the total in the part, and the kids figure it out themselves. The teacher, they do the thinking, not the teacher. But they're working in this little toy world where they can all, with these little models where they can all succeed equally. Before we move to full word problems, because kids can forget, if you've taught, kids can forget everything you've taught them if they start to get anxious. We give them charts where it says green, blue, total, and difference. And we give them 2 pieces of information, and they draw pictures and find the missing ones. But you'll notice at the bottom of the page here, the numbers are bigger than the grids. So a teacher has a choice. They can either let kids struggle, they can draw their own grids or sketches even, or the teacher can scaffold that more and help the kid. But when you do that kind of micro scaffolding, you can see exactly, exactly what your student can handle or your class can handle. And then our writers put the problems, very simple problems, into the charts, but to the kids guessing, they have to draw a picture and find all 4 pieces of information and circle the answer. And then later you can come back and have them draw their own sketches. This is more like Singapore Math. If you know, it's a very good program. But Singapore Math doesn't have this preamble, this kind of equalizer built in. And they can do multi-step problems involving different operations. So I hope that makes sense. And there are some other reasons behind the design here. So one of my heroes is Jennifer Kaminsky, who's done a lot of work on models and extraneous information and problem solving. So she asked teachers if kids were trying to learn paragraphs, would they do better with the examples on the left, where you have the pictures embedded in the bar graph, or on the right, where you've got just these boring gray bars. So the majority of teachers picked the ones on the left, and partly because they said they're more engaging, they represent what the problem's about. They'd be more interesting to the kids, you can count the objects. But in the study, the kids did better with the gray and black bars. And I don't know if you could see any reasons there. You may not be able to see the scale, but oops. Here, the scale goes up to 15, but the flowers don't match that. So kids got too caught up counting the objects and didn't learn to read the scale as well, whereas the simpler representation was more helpful. And her work has gone right down to grade 1, surprisingly, teaching kids fractions concept. Kids who are looking at fractions that were blue and green, say colorful flowers, did worse than kids who were just using gray and white circles. So there's lots of research now that sometimes are more abstract. And that's why we have those little grids that can be applied in any other problem. Also, there's a lot of research on how people become experts now that the school system really has to take account of. So we ask teachers now, if you're trying to teach all your kids chess, would you start with a system where everybody plays chess, because that's the end you want to get to, from the beginning of the year. You coach them, you let stronger players help weaker players, but all the kids are playing chess. Or would you choose a system where you start with mini games with just a few pieces, like there, can you checkmate in 1 move or 2 moves? And these games have been designed by experts to help kids develop what I called earlier mental representations, like to see the deep structure of things. So how does a piece move? What's a strong position? What's a weak position? And gradually, as the kids develop expertise and have success, you add more and more pieces and get to the full game. And of course, the kids can play the game too for fun, but there's a lot of coaching of that kind. And it's almost all teachers pick the second, which is good, because that's what the cognitive scientists, we have a Tracy here and probably some other people who know this stuff, but everyone I talk to says these are some of the reasons that second model is probably more efficient generally, is that we need scaffolding. As a mathematician, I can still only handle one thing at a time, one piece of new information or two. Sometimes because I know so much, I can see the structure of something, like in chess. But if it's something new, I have to go the way anybody else does. In fact, in chess, they did a study of chess experts, and when you put pieces on a board at random, really high-level chess players are no better at remembering positions than a person off the street. As soon as it comes from a game, the position, they can remember it like that. And that's because they have mental representations. You also need to draw kids' attention to the features of the problem. And kids aren't getting enough review or practice. And also in JUMP, we really raise the bar incrementally, and I'll show you that later, to get kids more and more excited about their successes. Because we also neglect the psychology of learning when we design lessons. So in the JUMP, people often look at JUMP and they only look at the student book and they think this is way too easy. They don't look, all the hardest questions are saved, the harder questions are saved for the teacher's guide. And also, this isn't exactly linear, but I've put it linear. The book 1 is generally easier and contains more review than book 2. And the kids go deeper and deeper. So I wanted to look at how these kind of principles play out also in some work that Margaret Sinclair did with her collaborators. This is a paper they published in a journal from the NCTM. And Margaret really believed that visual intuition, being able to visualize things, was incredibly important for success in math. And all my work is, I draw pictures all day in my research in math. She also knew from her experience that a lot of elementary teachers don't have the opportunity to develop those capacities, and often are anxious about these things. Geometry really makes a lot of people anxious. So there's a great article, you had the reference there, published in an NCTM journal on using pyramid structures to help people develop proportional reasoning. So, you know, if you have a triangle and you triple the length of the sides, the area doesn't triple, it actually goes up by 9. It's going up by the square of the sides. So they wanted people to investigate those kind of relationships also with volume in a structured way, exactly following the kind of principles I showed you there. And that's a really hard thing to design. Like geometry is really hard to design these experiences. And they did, like all great researchers, they did a lot of experimentation. So first they tried giving people plasticine to make cuts, but found that it was very hard to make clean cuts. And they eventually came up with this model where they had a plastic pyramid that you could put in different positions, and you could fill it up with water to different levels. You could measure the height and measure the sides, get the area and everything. People could actually explore those ideas themselves. But then that wasn't enough, because you also need to really draw their attention to the critical features of the problem. So they developed a whole online program, starting with triangles and so on, and building up to that, where people were led step by step to see those relationships. But interestingly, they did something that reminded me of the missing bullet problem. When they were looking at people's responses or their answers to the questions, they didn't just look at the things people observed or saw or the questions they answered. They looked at what they didn't see and what they couldn't answer. And they realized that they weren't directing people's attention enough to the salient features of the problem, and they kept modifying until they did. So let's look at another example. I want to make sure I can't see a clock here. Oh, good. So I don't want to go over time. So let's look at a different example in algebra. So this is a problem that would have freaked me out when I was in grade 8. Every letter there, this is like from the Olympiads for young kids. Every letter there stands for a different number. So S could be 5, but every letter stands for a unique number. So if S is 5, no other letter could be 5. Is that clear? And every S is 5. Wherever you have an S, it's 5. Okay? So you have to figure out what numbers could you put in there that would make that work as a proper addition. Is that clear? So just think about it for a second. Can you see any number there that you might be able to think, oh, you know, T is 4. I just know that. Put up your hand if you can see anything. How many of you are mathematicians? Yeah, all mathematicians? No, you're not? Okay, good. How many people don't see anything yet? You can't tell me a single number there. Well, how come not everyone's put up their hand? So either you see it, either you see it or you don't. It took me a while to see this, but I'm a mathematician. That's a pretty hard problem, and it takes a lot of perseverance. And before you answer, Peter, I want to give people some hints. Were you going to tell?
I was going to ask a question.
Yes.
Can anything be 0?
Yes, I think so. I don't know if in that problem anything is 0. I don't think anything in there is 0. Can you maybe can explain after?
I was just wondering if T could be 0.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I never thought of that. See, I'm a mathematician, I didn't even think of that. So let's suppose T can't be 0. 0, 0, E would be 0. Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. You're not even a mathematician. So I guess T could be 0, because if you let T be 0, then T and T is 0, you get equals 0, which is not allowed by the rules, because every letter stands for a unique number. So I guess T can be 0. So it's a great question. And you find out pretty quickly it can't be 0, because 0 plus 0 over on the right there would end up being 0, and that would mean E is 0. But that's not allowed. You can only have one number be 0. Okay, so that's actually more sophisticated than I ever saw in the problem. So, but I was able to solve this. And I want to talk about why I was able to solve this now and I couldn't when I was younger. So one thing is I have strategies I'm always looking for patterns or violations of patterns. So is there any letter there that stands out to you that looks a bit different? And there's no one answer. Yeah. H. Yeah, because there's 3 H's. How could a number plus a number give itself if you add it? That's puzzling. Any other letters there? Okay, YM. The only what? There's only one M. Okay, that's good too. I never saw that. For me, the one that sticks out like a sore thumb is T, because it's the only one that has nothing above it. Okay, so that's one thing, and all of you have noticed something there, and kids, if they're confident, they notice those things. Second thing is that differentiates me is I have knowledge. Remember I talked about domain-specific knowledge. I know something about addition, where just like a chess player, I can see what T is immediately. So if you add a pair of 1-digit numbers, and you end up having to regroup, like these are big enough so you have to regroup, or what people used to call carry. What's the biggest number you're ever going to carry? And you might be frozen and think, I don't know. I guess and check. That's another strategy. I would just try some numbers. And kids who are not afraid will guess and check. They'll try things out. So, you know, I would try the biggest numbers possible, and I only carry 1. And that happens even if I've got all 9s. I just carry 1. So immediately I know T is 1, and I'm really off to the races. Now I know E is 2. And then O is above 2, but it can't be 1, because I already used that. So what in the world could give me a 2 there? Something plus something adds to 2, and it's not 1. So it's got to be 6. Then you're going to carry a 1 over into the H's. And I actually found H by guessing and checking. I just kept going up. But when you guess and check, you can make educated guesses. I'm not going to let H be 3, let's say, because I know it's got to regroup over into T. It has to be bigger than 4, I guess, 5, I guess. So I'd start guessing there. Notice how I'm stumbling and everything. Like, I'm not a quick mathematician. I have to think about this as much as you do. Peter pointed out something I hadn't figured out, and Tracy solved it. So, like, math is accessible to everybody if you're not afraid and you're willing to struggle. And that's the final thing that separates me is I will never give up until I solve that, because I know that effort can pay off. And we believe all those things are teachable. So here's an example of an ingenious set of problems that our writers created to scaffold up to that, so kids can learn about the regrouping and everything. There's actually a mistake there that a reader of my book pointed out. I'll leave it up there. You can figure it out, but there's one problem in the bonus questions that's wrong. So I also tell students I make mistakes all the time, and they're very consoled by that. But suppose you want to go lower. So here's a game you could play with much younger kids. You put 2 tables at the front of the classroom, and you put a bag on one, and you say there's some blocks hidden in that bag. How many are in the bag? So can you guys see that? Now, if you were my students, you could have little boards you could hold up, or you could signal, or I might pick a volunteer. But kids get really excited about this. Then you tell them to close their eyes, and you change the number of blocks. And you play that a few times. The head of curriculum for a northern board in Louisiana, a very poor rural board, saw this lesson, and she said in all her years of education, she's never seen kids more excited, just from this simple game. So then gradually you say, well, I could draw a picture. And this is kind of a semi-abstract representation. The box there stands for a bag. And we ask the kids to draw them in. It's very important that they draw them first. And the weakest kid can count up, like they could say 2 and then count 3, 4 into the box. So there's no real barrier for kids there as long as you teach them how to do that. Then you come back, it gets really exciting when you put 2 bags and you say there's the same number in each bag. And so the kids kind of guess and check and they start figuring that out. And then you go back. Gradually you say, I don't want to have to write all this, so you start putting numbers in equal signs. And it's very important for kids to understand equal as a balance, because they often think equal just means add everything up, because they see equal at the side of the page. And then this is an example of what we get to invariably in one lesson with, say, grade 4 kids. I mean, they just think they're geniuses, and it's great practice at skip counting. You can build any number. Rather than just drilling kids on number facts, you build it into this kind of stuff, and they learn and remember their number facts really quickly. So this is how Mary Jane was able to shift the bell curve like that. So you've seen it in geometry, you've seen it in algebra. The problem is you might think, well, if you're starting at a low level, you're catching everyone up, what do you do about your faster kids? So I'm embarrassed to say that in our grade 5 book, we tell kids that Mary Jane used to get her kids writing the Pythagoras math competition. If you can't add, you can say 8, 9, 10 and count up. Or you can subtract that way by counting the difference. And there's new research showing embodied math is not a bad thing. So this is like the first page of one of our books. That's a grade 6 book. That's one of the reasons people have thought JUMP is a rote program. Not every kid has to use their fingers, and not every kid has to do every question. But this way you get kids, everyone in the class, being able to do the problems. And very quickly in grade 5, Mary Jane got her kids to grade level because they had to do patterns and tables, T-tables, which they can do by counting on. But you're going to have kids who are finishing early, and we never want anyone to be bored in a JUMP classroom. So you might think, how can I create a question that looks harder, but that will keep them in their zone of productive struggle and get them excited, but that's not really harder? So what could you do to make it look harder, a pattern problem like that? And what's the most obvious thing you could do? You know, and I'm not going to put you, I don't have time, and I'm not going to put you guys on the spot, but what's that?
Non-constant differences.
Pardon me?
You have non-constant differences?
Yeah, the kids love it when you change. You say, I'm going to trick you now, and you make the difference change. They love showing up. One of our deepest motivators is a sense of mastery. Kids love it when they can master something that looks hard to them. You could make the numbers bigger. You could also change where you leave out a number. So in the first line, that may look like a trivial difference, but for kids who struggled, they never even look where the information is in a problem that they need to solve it. So that from there they can see, it's a breakthrough when they see, oh, 10 and 13, I can get the information there. The next question is harder. If you say that's going up by a fixed amount, they have to guess and check or draw a picture. I'd actually have to draw a picture. I don't know what the number is. Like, I'd actually have to think about it. The next one, they start making, even strong students, strange mistakes. They'll subtract 22 and 4. And so they know the distance. What do you think they divide by to get the step? Because there's 2 blanks, they divide by 2, but there's actually 3 steps. So you can also, as you said, change the difference, like in the second problem. You can give them problems with sub-patterns, like when you add 5, there's all kinds of other patterns. Or you could give them the famous Fibonacci sequence. You might think, well, that's not really counting on. You know, when in the Fibonacci sequence, if you add any 2 numbers, you get the next number. So that doesn't sound like it's the same class of problem. But look at the gap in the Fibonacci sequence. And kids haven't lost their sense of wonder like most adults. They just are fascinated by these kind of patterns. And if when I do a demo lesson, I can have a 5-grade range in a classroom if I go in. I never worry about the top student at first, because I know I could always create a bonus question to slow them down if I need to. Like a good example here would be, find an example of a sequence that has that same property. And there's a one that's very common, the doubling numbers have that property. So, if you create a continuum of bonus questions that are incrementally harder, the faster kids will be able to work on it. You can focus on the kids you really need to help, but also it becomes like a ramp for the other kids. They start saying, I can do those questions. I went to visit Mary Jane's class once. She'd forgotten she'd covered up all what we call extension questions, which are even harder than these. And the kids, when I was going to meet with her, said, where are extension questions? They were so excited about doing these extra questions. So if you want to know more about this, we formed a partnership with the University of Calgary Math Ed Department called Math Minds, and they've created a website. And they even have an online course for teachers. And we've been doing research with them for many years in these districts in Alberta. And you can find all this, their publications and everything on the Math Minds website. And some data, for instance, this is a study in some schools where they track kids using the Canadian Test of Basic Skills, and it has a problem-solving scale and a conceptual scale. So we were really happy to see that kids constantly made improvements. And Brent, who led this, said that it's unusual in an education study. Usually you get a bump and a plateau. but the marks of the percentile rankings have gone up steadily. And he said they've continued to increase in these schools. I want to look at one last thing. You know, we've talked a lot about the design of lessons, scaffolding that you saw in Margaret's lessons, you know, for novice learners, not expert learners. Expert learners can struggle more, can handle more steps or concepts, but novice learners, you need to vary one thing at a time, and that's what they found in the geometry studies. But I think there's another missing bullet here. There's something we don't even look at in the design of curriculum. It's completely invisible to us. We talk about it, but we don't do anything about it. So the idea that mindsets are important. We don't really look at what impact hierarchies have in a classroom, visible hierarchies. And kids are, you know, anthropologists call humans status-seeking primates. If we are good at anything, it's knowing where we are in a pecking order. So there's research suggesting as early as grade 1, kids are starting to know if there's different expectations for them if they're in the inferior group. Suppose not all kids could learn math. That's fine. They're going to have to get used to being in the lower group. What if every kid could learn math, or almost every kid? Like, when almost, I mean 99% at least. What if almost every kid could learn math at a fairly high level? We couldn't have devised a better system for stopping that from happening. Because the minute the child thinks they're in the inferior group, what happens to their brain? Like any teacher can tell you, they're not going to focus, they're not going to work, they're not going to take risks. And it becomes a vicious cycle. They start to develop anxieties which completely destroy your ability to think. Probably why I'm not thinking too well up here. So, you know, and we don't take account of that in the design of curriculum. So it's the same mistake we make in chess. We mistake experts for novices. We design a program for experts when we really should be designing it for novices. Novices have completely different needs than experts. And it's the invisible bullet problem. We see what great students do, how they flourish, but they're experts. We need to be designing math programs for novices. And for two reasons. First, because it's cognitively inefficient to do otherwise. The most efficient way to learn is through mini games in chess, well-designed mini games, but it's psychologically inefficient. The minute you push kids out of their zone of productive struggle, the minute you make them feel different from other kids, you know, you've definitely almost doomed those lower kids to staying at that level. So Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, where she showed kids do better if they think they can get better through practice than if they think they have to be born with a gift for something. And I thought I had to have a gift, which is why I'd give up all the time as a young student. She watched a jump class and said that because we keep kids in the zone where they're doing things that look hard but aren't too hard, that would help them develop growth mindsets. And this is what a class looks like. This is a class in Lower Manhattan, very poor neighborhood, a lot of languages in schools. These kids got the greatest gains on the New York State test of all schools in New York City. Like out of 1 million kids, they got a 30 percentage point gain. And that's what math class looked like. The teacher wrote a blog for Achieve the Core where she said these kids wouldn't stop doing math. They would go for hours. So that's what an equitable class could look like. And to try and accelerate this progress, JUMP is developing an integrated service where we not only have an in-class program, but we now are supporting after-school clubs like Beyond 330 in Toronto, Learning Disabilities Associations. We're creating tutoring programs, including new online tutoring programs. We're working with Tracy Solomon and the YMCA to develop a national preschool program for kids to try and level the playing field before kids get into school. We're now in the TDSB, we're going to be testing parent nights, and we've already tested some online supports for parents at home. We're working with universities like the University of Calgary to develop courses for pre-service teachers, and we're working with governments also to change policy and to, you know, make sure teachers get this kind of the support they need and get access to evidence-based practices. So I highly recommend you look up Daniel Willingham. He's a great cognitive scientist who writes about education, especially if you're a teacher. He talks about how you apply these principles in a classroom. But he said, I can't even read that, so you can read it. But you know, we've created a society of differences, of profound differences, when we all learn the same way. We all have the same cognitive needs, and we all have the same emotional needs. We're all motivated by the same things: a sense of mastery, a sense of purpose, which kids feel when they're all succeeding together. They stop competing against each other. They compete against the problem. If you want to do equity work or empathy work or anything like that, or mindset work, you tell your students, yeah, you can get better through practice. You need to respect other people and so on. And then the next day you show them they can't get better through practice, that they have to compete for a scarce resource like attention, marks, and so on. I don't know where that went, but you know, we undermine all the work we do, a lot of the work we do in empathy, equity, and so on, by not looking at one of the key sources of the problem, which is intellectual poverty. We've had trouble eradicating material poverty. We're still going backwards, I would say. But intellectual poverty, with no extra expense, we could eradicate in a couple of years, as Mary Jane showed. So that's where we should be focusing our equity work, I think. And this can happen in any subject, but math is a particularly easy subject to do this work in, for all the reasons I've talked about today. So, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, John.